All right, it is 1:30 on the dot. Shall we go ahead and get started? How y'all doing? Let's get some words going on in the chat. Let us know how you're feeling. It is 1:30 on Eastern Time. My name is Natalie. I'm going to be moderating this session. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a third-year counseling psychology doctoral student at the University of Kentucky. Broadly, I study social justice and love, sex, and spirituality among Black folks. I'm so excited to be here with you today and my dynamic speakers. I think Duchess already made one cameo. She'll probably be back. Duchess is my dog. She loves presenting. So if she pops up, don't mind her. I promise she doesn't have too much to say. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my lovely presenters. So Dr. Thorpe, you want to jump in and let us know who you are?
Hi, my name is Dr. Shamika Thorpe. My pronouns are she, her. I am a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Kentucky in the counseling psychology department, and my research focuses on the sexual well-being of Black women.
Yes,
I guess I'm next.
go for
Hi,
it.
everyone. My name is Dr. Sam Ware. I am a postdoctoral researcher at Drexel University, which is located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. 215 stand up. My actual area code is actually 267, but that's something different. Um, I have a focus in sexual health equity among Black men and women. I'm specifically looking at HIV prevention and looking at social structure issues, which include racism.
Yes, thank you so much for your introductions. We always like to get started by knowing who is in the room with us. So we saw a couple of people checking in the chat about feeling good and energized, see some excitement. Where's everybody located? And feel free to use your voice. Let us know your city, your zip code, or shout it out in the chat just to know who's with us today.
Seattle.
Hey.
Jamaica,
Right. Okay, Jamaica.
where I'm trying to be.
Do you hear me? Do you hear me? Because here it is rainy today and I'm not feeling it.
Over it.
Okay, Rocky Mountains, Chicago, H-Town. I have a soft spot in my heart for H-Town. Lots of fun.
We got some Canada folks also.
Yes. Also, we would love to see your faces. We did design this presentation to be very interactive. We're going to be getting you all involved in some conversations. Of course, no requirement whatsoever, but if you would be willing to share with us, we would love to see you celebrate your beautiful faces. Okay, New York, Massachusetts, Jamaica. Jamaica is in here. I feel like this might be a sign that we need to go to Jamaica.
And stay there.
Okay. Because, I don't know, it's a little raggedy stateside. I don't know. There's something going on.
The ghetto.
Not in the pandemic, and that's fair.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fair. All right. So thank you for letting us know who's in the room with us. I'm going to go ahead and share our initial presentation screen. So as you all know, this conversation is going to focus on spirituality and intimacy, centering Black bodies and pleasure. Briefly for our outline, we're going to be going over some of our research findings, as well as inviting you all into candid conversation about pleasure. And then towards the end, we're going to reserve time for questions. I am going to make a recommendation that we leave our questions in the chat. And as the moderator, I'm going to ensure that we make time for those questions and integrate any other relevant dialogue. So to get started, we're into qualitative research. Qualitative research is my baby. Let's define pleasure and what it means. So I'm going to introduce a screen here. It's a feature that's referred to as Slido. And from the Slido screen, you all can use your phone or you can use another digital device. Feel free to visit slido.com and hit pleasure as your access code. And here we're going to invite you to put in your definition of pleasure. So I'm going to go ahead and activate the poll now. How do you define pleasure? Now, what's great is that we're going to get to take part in all these definitions, and they will be anonymous. Okay, freeness. Panel, how would y'all describe pleasure? or define it?
I've changed my definition probably over the last 2 months. I said mine was attentiveness, I believe was one of my words that I had said. We were doing our top 3 words. I think it was attentiveness, passion,
Mm-hmm.
and I forgot my third one. It wasn't intimacy, but something like that.
Yeah, I think for me, mine is definitely intimacy,
Mm-hmm.
feeling safe,
Mhm.
and I also agree with being free.
Yeah. Yeah. So something
Liberation.
interesting about Slido is that when folks put the same answer, it grows bigger. So this is interesting as we see results coming in that liberation is a key piece here. And that's definitely a word in my definition of pleasure. Okay, endorphins. Yes, it is a full body experience. Some of our themes hit on those sensory and physical pieces.
All right, I like that.
Mm. If it pleases me, I will. I like that a lot. Mhm. So go ahead and take maybe 30 seconds to 1 more minute to add. I think it is set where you can add an additional definition if that pleases you.
And orgasmic, yes. Ooh.
Mhm.
Sensory transcendence. You better. Okay.
Got to step on my definition.
Right. I'm feeling very basic right now. Very basic.
That is like a name. Like if I was going to be known by something, sensory transcendence. Okay. Y'all better copyright that, whoever that was. All right, so we'll go ahead and bring things home with what we see here. So our beautiful word cloud of definitions of pleasure. What are we seeing here? So I'm going to invite you all as a crowd to put on your researcher hats and look for some themes. What's emerging here for this group of individuals gathered to talk about pleasure? And again, the words that are larger mean multiple people typed that exact response. And this question is open for the panel. If anyone wants to use their voice and maybe tell us what you're noticing, feel free to do so now. Intimacy got bigger. I just noticed that. Anything we're noticing? Wavelength, I like that.
And also feel free to put in the chat box.
Oh, there's my chat feature. Lovely. A thread of positive and respectful relationality, timelessness. Ooh, could you say more to that, Tanya, if you don't mind?
Sure. First of all, I should declare that I'm not Black, but Shireen said I was welcome, so I thank you all for allowing me to be here. I think what I feel about timelessness is I guess it is sort of similar to the transcendence idea. It's a feeling of being one with eternity and not focusing on any stress or anxiety or questions or who am I not, but knowing exactly who I am, and but it's sort of being connected to one's essence is what I had in mind. Thank you very much. And if anyone would rather I wasn't here, I'm Armenian from Turkey, so I grew up as an oppressed minority member there. So I'm familiar with the experience of that. But if anyone would rather I was not here, I'll be glad to leave you to yourselves. So just let me know. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Tanya, and being forthright with your identity and how you may take up or not take up space in this virtual format. I do want to acknowledge that this is a held and embraced space. So if for any reason someone would like to share a concern with us, feel free to write one of us as panelists directly. I'd also invite those who coordinated this beautiful conference. They are definitely embraced folks who can take that feedback. So feel free to let us know if needed. But otherwise, I do welcome you in this space, Tanya. And again, if anyone thinks otherwise, please feel free to let us know.
Yes, absolutely. And I turned my video on so you can also see me. I'm in my 60s.
Thank you for sharing. Hi.
Hi.
All right. So I love the pieces you said about essence and timelessness and eternity. It really makes me think about this continuous idea of being in the present moment, because all we have are our present moments time and time again. Reviewing some of the other things we see in the chat, I see pleasure requiring some vulnerability. Absolutely. I think that's something we'll definitely touch more on today. The idea of simultaneous release and control. That's interesting. So kind of like a both and going on. So Manya, I'd be interested if you'd like to share what you meant by that or say more about that release and control piece.
Yeah, I think that it, like, in order for, well, at least in my own experience, the times where I felt that I was able to like tap into my pleasure the most were when I felt that I had like the sense of bodily autonomy. And so being able to say, you know, what it is that I actually need you to do. But when that aspect was missing, then a lot of times like I wouldn't finish, but my partner would. And then there was this sense of, they're receiving pleasure from my body, but I'm not receiving that. And so I felt very like objectified in that sense and like used. But when that sense of like control and agency is there and I'm able to assert it, then I'm able to also release in that space to be able to like receive my maximum pleasure.
I really like this idea of release and receive that you brought up. That was beautiful. Thank you for sharing. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the screen now. And I would say this is a document, as in the word cloud. If that be of interest later, we can definitely save that. And to that point, I also dropped a link to the playlist if anyone was interested in downloading it. It's available on Apple and Spotify, and we can drop that again at a later time. So we'll go ahead and move into larger portions of our discussion. For Dr. Thorpe or Dr. Ware, were there any other pieces with definitions of pleasure you all wanted to add to the conversation right now?
I don't have any right now.
Okay, Dr. Ware?
I will say I love the piece about vulnerability, and I think that also connects with what we were seeing on the word cloud when people talked about liberation and freedom, and how to be free, there's an aspect of vulnerability that is needed. So I love that word vulnerability when it comes to pleasure. I think for a lot of people, that's what hinders them from experiencing full pleasure, because you have to expose who you are and be able to deal with all of that. So that was a huge piece for me. So thank you. I'm not sure who was in that chat that sent that, but I loved it.
Mm-hmm. Same. I could talk for hours about some vulnerability.
Listen, child. Oh.
Oh my goodness, especially as a therapist, it just comes right out of me. But we wanted to start with an activity like that because, you know, as we're pursuing liberation, wellness, restoration, these larger ideas, it's really important for us to take the time to deconstruct and decolonize our definitions around various things, including how we think about pleasure. So this was a brief opportunity for us to kind of begin that reflection and see where we're all sitting moving into the research. Now, speaking of research, we know that traditionally sex research has been through a deficit lens, very medicalized and hurtful to BIPOC communities. So it's very important for us to first talk about what we're bringing into this session, is something that's based in sex positivity. So for our first authors or primary researchers, Dr. Thorpe and Dr. Ware, I was hoping we could spend a little bit of time talking about what sex positive research is and what it means.
Yeah. So sex positive research is research that focuses on sexuality beyond just sexual behaviors, but also the feelings that come along with that. It goes beyond focusing on HIV prevention, pregnancy prevention, STI prevention, and kind of these health disparities, which are important and we do need research on them, but also it's important to highlight other aspects of marginalized population sexuality. And so the studies that we're going to present today really do that by focusing on sexual pleasure among populations who have largely, like, this type of research has been omitted.
And I will also add, as I mentioned in the beginning, a lot of my focus is on HIV prevention within the sexual health realm. And just like Shamika mentioned, it's important to look beyond that, especially when it comes to Black bodies, just because we have been targeted a lot of times as being disease carriers when it comes to research. So to examine not only, you know, our behaviors, but other things that involve sex as well, because sex is a normative practice and other races have the privilege of being able to be included in research that looks at their practices as normative, while ours is more disease focused.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was definitely going to add that. I was going to say, yeah, it's easy for like white people to go and look up research on pleasure and orgasms and desire, and then we go look it up and there's nothing there, right?
Disease,
So,
no, that's
right.
fair.
It's like it's only diseases and pregnancy prevention
Right.
or sexual violence, and it's like, let's do something else. Like there's other parts of us, and so I think that's one thing that's really important and one thing that we're highlighting. And I always make note to say, like, one reason why there might not be as much research is because funders don't see it as something that's important. And so I think, you know, doing the work beyond that and realizing that it is something important and something that our community needs, and it's something that's valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Listen, the disease part is hitting for me. I was just writing about this for an essay, but I can remember being like, when I first came to undergrad, I've always been a research nerd. And I was like, oh, I want to research sex. And I remember I went to a predominantly white university, and I remember being met with comments like, well, you can't do that unless you're going to research STIs or abstinence only, or like pregnancy and things like that, because I've always been passionate about this work in BIPOC communities, and specifically for Black folks. So being met with that so early, and then thinking through my childhood and how that message has always been there, was huge for me. But I'm also thinking, because we know that we need that preventative research as well, how do we make that sex positive? So what does it mean to continue to extend the literature on STIs and other areas that are rightfully concerning and that we should know about, but how do we keep it sex positive?
So Shamika and I 2017, 2018, I don't know, the years are blurring together. We actually did some research on sexual health interventions for Black women. So the paper looked at asset-based approaches and deficit-based approaches when it came to sexual health research. So deficit meaning, you know, targeting or looking at disease-focused research, and then asset-based, looking at other parts of sexuality, including pleasure. And what we found was a lot of the sexual health interventions focused mainly on a deficit-based or disease-focused lens when it came to Black women. So in our paper, we talk about the importance of being able to look at, you know, HIV prevention and STI prevention, but also incorporating these other aspects as well. So ways to make condoms sexy, ways to add pleasure and sexual communication, and add those components also in these disease-focused, or your main objective is to create people who are more focused on using condoms, but making sure there's some pleasure added into that as well, or some sex positive aspects added to that as well. So I think you can still have interventions and research that are have the aim of decreasing STIs and HIV, but it's important to also incorporate these other aspects of sexuality as well.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And then adding also that we're starting that early. So like making sure that when we're doing that, it's even with sexuality education curriculums that are for adolescents. So I teach sex ed to teenagers usually. And so just making sure that we're incorporating things that are pleasure inclusive and how to communicate and all these different things within curriculums early on is also super helpful.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. I always think it's good to have those tangible applications available because I feel like a lot of us are having these conversations, but putting it into motion tends to be where we get hung up, right? So, speaking of putting things into motion, we're going to be going over two studies that put sex positivity research into motion. And on the title slide, we use the words centering Black bodies and centering pleasure. So before we provide the overview of the studies, what did it mean for you all to approach this research in that way?
Yeah. It meant having an all Black team, step one.
Okay.
And that's for both papers. So that's one thing that it really meant, if we're going to center Black people, then making sure that, we're actually representing the populations that we serve. And so that was super helpful. It meant listening to the populations that we serve, right? Like we're not a monolith, although we identify as Black cisgender women, we can't speak for all Black cisgender women, right? So just making sure that we're listening and, providing that representation on our teams.
Um, for me, so my research is focused on Black men, and I identify as a cisgender Black woman. So for me, it was really trying to be cognizant of my biases and what I was coming into as a Black woman. I know at times I had some feelings and thoughts about Black men. So I knew going into this research, I needed to step outside of that. So I had done some reading on some literature focused on Black men and sexuality to find where there was a gap in research. And just like for Black women, there was a gap in research when it talked about pleasure. Again, because for Black bodies, whether they're men or women, a lot of research was focused on disease. And I wanted to kind of do the same thing I was doing with Black women and understand that, research is not solely or should not be solely focused on disease, but there are other aspects of sexuality that should be explored. So for Black men, I wanted to do the exact same thing. Again, our research team was completely Black, which made it so much more easier, a little less to fight with. But also we had a Black man come into our research team who was able to kind of give us another perspective on pleasure, sexuality, and also sexual health and HIV prevention.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. So I'm hearing these pieces come up, especially related to the team and how our identities show up in the research. So of course, me with my qualitative hat on, I'm like, all right, here we go, because I can see the pros and cons of the all Black team versus a team of mixed racial ethnic identity. And then that extends into other identities as well. I was wondering if we could speak more to those pieces. So I heard that there was one Black man that joined the team. What would it have meant if these teams had a white person, for example, on them? And feel free to integrate other identity pieces as well and how those play into what the research looked like and meant.
So for my research study, we specifically asked the participants, how would this have looked if there was a white person doing this? And no, they did not want that. So I think it's very important to not only look at it from the researcher's point of view, but also to look at it from the participant's point of view. So for those people that do qualitative studies or know the importance of getting stories from your participants, you know that the participants are the experts. So if they state that they would prefer a Black person, a Black researcher, a Black community member, being the ones interviewing them or having discussions about sexual health, that's who needs to be doing it. So for us, we asked them like point blank, like if we were going to do this again, would it be okay if it was a white woman? Would it be okay if it was a white man? And they were like, nah, dog, it would not be okay. I was like, true, I agree. So I think it's definitely important to make sure the population that you're researching or researching, I hate that word, the population that you're engaging with, your team is representative of that population.
And I think that also goes as far as like age and sexual orientation too, right? So I think about my study and how it extended to people that were 50, right? So if we had someone that was 50 doing an interview with someone who was, in their 20s, that might have been different or felt different for them versus them doing an interview with someone who was the same age as them. Or if we had someone who was queer, identified as queer, and they were doing an interview with someone that was heterosexual, they may not have been willing to give as much information, if they would have interviewed with someone who was the same identity as them. So that's one thing to also keep in mind too.
So I don't know about y'all, but I am ready to hear about these studies. Like, I'm just like, ooh, what happened? What's going on? So who would like to go first and tell us about study one? I can pick one, but
I could go.
okay, go for it.
So last fall, I completed a study with my team on sexual pain, pleasure, and anxiety among Black women living in the South. So the age ranges for this study were ages 18 to 50. These were cisgender Black women. They were all premenopausal because menopause can cause sexual pain. So I didn't want that to necessarily be something that I was studying right now. And so we looked at I think we had over 300 participants. I want to say it's like 304 participants that participated in a survey, and 25 people that participated in a follow-up interview. And it was just really nice to hear everyone's perspectives as it relates to how they define sexual pleasure, how they define sexual anxiety, communication with partners and providers about sexual pain, and the ways that they cope with sexual pain.
Yes.
I'm up next. Okay.
Go for it.
Like there's another panelist somewhere that's going to pop up. I don't know why. So my study was done, again, don't remember the year, it's 2019. And this study was actually part of a larger study with college students at HBCUs. So my study specifically focused on pleasure among Black men. So the age group was from 18 to 25. And these were younger Black men. We looked at their definitions of pleasure, what contributed to their definitions of pleasure, and also how that impacted their condom use. So I should also state that this study was part of a larger study that was focused on HIV prevention. And like I mentioned previously, the importance of incorporating other aspects of sexuality when we are talking about HIV prevention. So for us, this study also, we saw the importance of also incorporating pleasure when we talked about condom use.
Nice. So in true qualitative spirit, we have our study themes, pulled up for you all to view. So I'm going to go ahead and share those for everyone to look over. And if you all would like to talk us through these results, I was fortunate to work with Shamika on her studies, so I'm happy to jump in any places. But let's jump in with these results. What did we see?
Yeah, well, if you want to jump in and do the foundational part, you could do that.
Yes, so we're gonna go there with the Pleasure Mountain because I feel like it's a thing.
Yeah, just go ahead. Just go ahead, Pleasure Mountain.
So just know it's gonna be a published paper. I'm claiming it now. And essentially what we saw is Pleasure Mountain. And in Pleasure Mountain, we have foundations to Black women's pleasure. So those foundations are physical, mental, and emotional. And what that meant is that when our participants talked about what was pleasurable for them, these areas were activated. Going back to what we saw at the beginning with the word cloud, intimacy was a word that came up, right? So if you can think about the ways that intimacy can be physical, mental, and emotional, for example. And that's not to say that intimacy was the only way that these foundational pieces were met for our participants. But as I mentioned, you can think of these as the foundation of a mountain of pleasure. And then from there, we move into the overall themes. So I'll turn it back over to Shamika for the overall themes.
Yeah, so for the overall theme, some things that we saw were liberatory aspects. So the fact that someone that you all said liberation and that was big, that's why I was getting excited when y'all were saying, I was like, yes, yes, like I saw that. So, you know, people were talking about freedom and it's feeling liberating. We also saw some relational components, which included intimacy. It included mutuality and reciprocity, and that idea of safety and feeling safe with your partner, or whoever your sexual partner is, as well as attention. And then we also saw this idea of spirituality and transcendent aspects. So feeling bliss and euphoria. And a lot of people talked about mindfulness and, you know, like it's a spiritual experience. And so that's one thing that really stood out for the Black women in the study.
And I believe it was Rochelle maybe who had mentioned religion. I do want to kind of call into like the space, going back to that question, when we talked about these spiritual and transcendent pieces, as an interviewer, they weren't things that were tainted by purity culture, I would say. So I recall them being very like freeing and relaxing and being able to tap into this like eternal sense of pleasure and being one with a partner, or even one with self, if we're talking about self pleasure at that. So I think that does complement and go really hand in hand with that liberatory piece, because we know that in the past, religion has operated as one of those structures that can be oppressive to experiences of pleasure. So any thoughts on these results before we transition to the Black men's pleasure results? And I'm trying to get back to my chat here to see, but feel free to use your voices. Any reactions to what we see here? Does this resonate? Any questions you have?
Hi, my name is Tasha. I have a quick question.
Yeah.
When we were discussing what they felt throughout their pleasure, did anybody mention how they felt spiritually?
Not necessarily spiritually, no, they didn't. Beyond talking about mindfulness in that way. Does that what you mean? Do you mean like
Yes, I mean, as did they have like a spiritual climax as well? Because having an intimate encounter with somebody and just having pleasure and agency over your body, I'm thinking that will have you like spiritually connected with your higher power or even within yourself. You know, I'm just thinking of like pleasure within the spirit because you're having pleasure mentally, physically, and emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
So you're reaching like a higher vibration throughout that whole entire thing.
Yeah, when people refer to spirituality in the way that you're talking about it, they refer to it more as spiritual intimacy, and that was with a partner, but not necessarily like spirituality in a sense of something that's like an individual thing that they felt beyond mentioning mindfulness or this bliss or this type of transcendence.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I see some great questions from Sandrine, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, in the chat. I'm going to circle back to those once we move towards implications. Any other comments or thoughts about the Black women's pleasure data? I just saw the Pleasure Mountain comment. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's a thing. It's a thing, Shireen. It's a thing. All right. So let's go ahead and jump into the other themes.
Okay, so for the Black men, as I mentioned, I came in with some biases that I had to check myself on, just because I came in with a bias thinking that Black men were going to be like, pleasure is a nut. And then that would be the end of my whole focus group. And I'd be like, all right, thank you so much. But it was crazy because as you can see with the Black women's side, men were talking about the emotional and mental connection as well. So even though their first comment was like, yeah, nut, then we were like, all right, and what else? And they started talking about the importance of having this intimate connection with their partners in order to achieve that maximum pleasure. So once they knew that they could be intimate with their partners, if there was an emotional connection with their partners, then that nut or the ejaculation that they felt was more intense. And for that aspect was very similar to Shamika's study with the Black women of having those different components of pleasure. Also, the importance of mutual pleasure. So the men talked about the importance of making sure their partner was pleased, and that's what increased their pleasure as well. It wasn't necessarily for selfless reasons. Some of them wanted to make sure their partner was pleased for their reputations, and also to make sure that they were their partners were having a gratifying experience. And then also pleasure related to relationship status. I don't know if you guys ever heard of different grades of dick, but in our focus groups, men talked about women that receive grade A dick, grade B dick, and grade C dick. So if you ever felt like your partner was not giving you what your partner should be giving you, you could have been receiving grade C dick. And the reason for that, Natalie's like, no. And the reason for that is participants mentioned that grade C dick was for women or partners that they believed were like a white night stand. They were not going to see these people again. They didn't feel like they needed to put in that much effort. But for the people that they were in committed relationships with, their pleasure was monumental, making sure that their partners were pleased and also that they received pleasure. So they brought their grade A dick. I don't know how true that is, but I'm going with what the participants said. And this is what they explained to me as the different levels of dick giving.
You know what? And I'm having a reaction using my my clinical verbiage, because if that's the case, like, I'm handing out different grades of pussy. So since we gonna have
right,
know that it was graded in that way, and now I need to investigate it, because I have some thoughts and questions. But that's another study that we'll present at next year's conference, because this is amazing. This conference is gonna keep going, and I'm gonna speak that into existence.
Amen.
So, similarities and differences between the studies. What do we see? What stands out?
I think one thing that really came up was like the idea of intimacy. So that the fact that both Black men and Black women said that was very important. I know one thing that popped up on the word cloud that we were doing earlier was love. And I know in Dr. Hargon's study, which is a big sex study, so it's neither one of these studies, Black men had love as one of their top definitions of pleasure, but Black women didn't, and nor did Black trans men or non-binary people have love in there. It was Black men. I was like, yes, that's something there. So, you know, the fact that intimacy is mentioned in both is something that I think is really important. I know when Sam and I were talking about, you know, submitting to the conference, one thing that really stood out that I'm glad she brought up was the mutual pleasure. So, you know, we have people that are talking about reciprocity in both, but it seems like for men, they really focused on their partner. Like they were talking about making sure their partner was pleased, versus for Black women, when they were defining pleasure, it had nothing to do with their partner. Like, and what that even means, right? Like, maybe because it's assumed that their partner, if it's a male partner, is going to receive pleasure anyway. So why do I have to focus on theirs? One thing that I did see is for women who weren't heterosexual, they did mention the fact that their partner's pleasure in their definitions. And so that's an example of, like, you know, reciprocity, and that popped up. And then one other thing that I think is different is safety. So we definitely have themes of safety for Black women, but for Black men, I didn't see the same thing there.
And I wouldn't even necessarily define it as safety. I still believe it's a level of intimacy and comfort, maybe. So for Black men, they talked about like cuddling and how much they love to cuddle, and I was like, oh, how cute. But they loved like they talked about after sex, the idea of being able to cuddle with their partners, but the rationale for it was being able to know that they did a good job. So this was your partner like comes over and cuddles with you because you lay down that dick. So she's happy. But if she doesn't cuddle with you, it was like, all right, I didn't do what I needed to do. So it seemed as though their partner's pleasure was always like at the forefront of their mind, making sure that they were pleasing their partner. And like Shamika mentioned, that wasn't the same for Black women. And we had a discussion about that, if that was honestly just because Black women or women in general just assume that the man is already going to receive his pleasure. And so that's not really their concern, but making sure that they are pleased somehow, because it seems that some men struggle with that, is is what they were more focused on.
And I think also too, the liberation piece. So liberation and freedom and kind of this like spirituality that didn't pop up for Black men. And so I think that shows too how, you know, being a Black woman, you may be more oppressed in a different way, like as it relates to sexuality. We face all these different sexual stereotypes. Definitely, like when someone was mentioning religion and purity culture, religion is more strict on women, especially Black women, than it is Black men. And so some of those things definitely come into play. And so the fact that you have sex and you're feeling pleasure, and that's your moment of freedom and your moment of liberation is really important. And so the fact that it popped up for Black women, but not necessarily for Black men, is something that we should definitely highlight.
Absolutely. So we're coming in on our last 10 minutes. Let's move into some limitations and implications for this work. And then I've collected a short list of questions here for the panel. As we're talking through the implications and limitations, if folks have other questions, please feel free to submit those now.
So some limitations that I mentioned earlier was the two researchers, or the two people leading the research for my study, were Black women. So it was me and another person leading the study. We're both Black women. We come in it with our own biases and our own personal experiences in life, which is very different than Black men. So being able to check our biases when we came to the door, knowing that we were not going to have the same experiences and mindsets as Black men, was very important throughout the study. And also we had a limited amount of queer men. So there were only 2 queer men in our study. They were very vocal and were able to provide us with their own experiences as well, which were somehow similar to the heterosexual men as well. But the limitation within that study was it was not a large population of queer men within our study. I think it was representative of the general public, considering we did have a large sample of heterosexual men and also a small sample of queer men. But those were the 2 huge limitations within our study. And obviously, if we were to do the study again, making sure that we are able to reach out to more people that may not necessarily identify as heterosexual, and also gain their experiences as well within the aspect of pleasure and sexual health, especially when it comes to HIV prevention, just knowing that there is a large percentage of Black queer men that do have HIV, and making sure that even within that aspect, pleasure is also included.
And I think for me, my major limitations were kind of with going back to, you know, heterosexual and sexual orientation. So I think about 78% of the sample was heterosexual. So definitely wanting to recruit more people who are not heterosexual going forward. Also, the entire sample lived in the South. That's really important for me because I'm a North Carolina native. So, you know, true to my Southern roots. And we have a lot
too.
of, no, you just live there. Okay. But you know, just making sure that I wonder sometimes how these things would look different if it was a nationwide sample or a national sample versus just being in the South. Would we still see some of these liberation pieces popping up, you know, if religion is a major factor in that? So that's one of the things that I really want to move forward with, doing bigger studies.
Great. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce some of our questions in. We had some great points from the audience. The first was about decolonized methods. So of course, with this study, with these studies, excuse me, they did take on a traditional qualitative methodology. But I really thought this question was interesting in terms of how we could use decolonized methods such as story work or dream work in research, or maybe even in practice when we're talking about sexual pleasure.
So I don't think qualitative research automatically means colonized research. I think it actually gives the ability to decolonize research because it is putting stories or listening to the stories of participants. And I think a lot of times research sometimes just looks at numbers and looks at associations and just looks at what percentage of whatever, but not necessarily listening to the stories of the individuals. So I think decolonizing research is qualitative is a part of that as well. Being able to have the individuals tell their stories, talk about their experiences, and create their own narratives. So a part of my research was the largest study that I talked about. I looked at masculinity and masculinity among Black men and having them be able to define what that meant, create their own narratives that was a counter narrative to what is presented within society. So I think that is a huge aspect of decolonizing research, being able to give participants or give people within the community the ability to tell their own stories.
I think I'm thinking too, we've made some mention of the Big Sex Study with Dr. Candace Hargons, and we have forms of research that are emerging that are based in critical or social justice frameworks. So with participatory action research, we approach this humongous study of over 500 Black people, and we integrated community partners. So if you all are familiar with, oh my gosh, help me think here, Shamika. So Marla with Velvet Lip Sex.
And Sex Down South, Tanya Bass. We have Black Girls Guide to Menopause, Dr. Tracy Gilbert, Dr. Yarnesia Dyson. I'm forgetting someone or multiple people. Jasmine Johnson. So like a lot of Black sexuality professionals that were on the panel for this, or on our community partners for this study.
And by integrating those different folks who also had connections to different identities within Blackness, we were able to reach out to a broader community to make sure that our sample was truly representative with our voices. So taking steps like that can be helpful. And I hope that kind of contributes to the second point posed. I can't remember who posed these questions, forgive me, but there was a point about managing ethics committees. And I'm assuming that's about like IRBs at an institution. Using some of those methods that give you wiggle room, and some of what Sam talked about related to how qualitative research gives you wiggle room, those are the ways that you can finesse. And believe me, the finesse works. Any other points on the ethics committee that you all mentioned? Okay. So returning to some earlier points, we had a question about talking with young people about pleasure and just offering a broader idea of like sexual pleasure research and education and how we can do that. So I guess application based, how we take this research and get it back out to folks, especially our young folks, because we know that this development starts very early. So.
Yeah, so recently I was having a conversation with an organization that makes evidence-based interventions for adolescents. And they had a panel of community partners and sexuality educators. And one thing that we always talked about was modifying curriculums, right? Like as a Black sexuality educator, I cannot walk in with this curriculum that's for all people, that's not pleasure inclusive, that doesn't include any language that resonates with people, and then give this intervention to teens. And so the way that we modify language, the way that we make things more accessible and make sure that things resonate, we could do the same thing with pleasure to a certain extent. So there are like supplemental materials that people can use to add to whatever current education tools that they may have. One way I got around that, doing that in North Carolina, was offering things as an after school program, because, you know, like some schools are still abstinence only, or some counties, because it's county based in North Carolina. So that's one thing that people can do. And then also just reaching out and hiring like sexuality educators, making sure that sex ed isn't taught by gym teachers. So yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm cracking up because my sex ed was taught by my gym teacher. So we have reached the end of this presentation. You all have posed amazing questions, absolutely amazing. And I wish we had more time to be in community. I'm going to share all of our contact information as we wrap up for today. There was a question on how to support us. Oh, excuse me, that's my background. Good vibes only. And the best way to support us is to honestly join us on social media. Feel free to email us. We always love opportunities to connect via email, websites, or social media as mentioned. And thank you all so much for your time today.
Thank you. Someone said, can you put them in the chat, please?
Do we need the emails and stuff in the chat?
I'm assuming so.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Then Jean, I will work on that. And I'll leave it up as we close out.
Thank you all for joining us.
Yes, and thank you for the questions. Much appreciated.